I'll say good evening and welcome everyone to our Wake County Board of Education meeting. It is Tuesday, April 6th, calling this meeting to order at 5:37 p.m. We do have a quorum, as all board members are here and present, along with Superintendent Moore. So quorum is determined. If you all would stand with me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you all for that, and we'll get it right started. First up is Superintendent Moore with your comments. So, Superintendent Moore, we turn over to you.
Good evening, Chair Sutton and board members. As we prepare to greet additional students to our schools this week, I want to begin this evening by thanking our 410 custodians and the entire custodial services team for the work they have done throughout the pandemic to keep our schools and work sites safe and clean. When schools closed for in-person learning last March, our custodians continued to report to work each day to keep buildings open for staff who needed or were coming into work on site. In October, our custodians worked in partnership with school leaders and other teams from facilities to install hand sanitizer stations, hang signage, move furniture to prepare for the first cohorts of students to return for in-person learning. Our custodians were right there when we shifted again to daily in-person instruction for students in elementary schools and to rotations for middle and high schools in November. Then they moved furniture once again and adjusted cleaning protocols to keep our schools safe and welcoming for students and staff this week. To our entire custodial services team, thank you for the countless hours of hard work you have put in throughout this past year. You have played a critical role in making it possible for our schools to welcome students at all grade levels back for daily in-person instruction this week. We appreciate you and are grateful for your service to our district. Next, congratulations to Messiah Smith, a sophomore at Knightdale High School who was named the 2021 champion in the Poetry Out Loud National Recitation Contest. Messiah was coached by Knightdale theater teacher Matthew Clay Raines, was one of 9 state finalists. Each finalist had to recite works they memorized from an anthology of more than 1,000 classic and contemporary poems. Messiah recited American Smooth by Rita Dove, The Song of the Feet by Nikki Giovanni, and On Virtue by Phyllis Wheatley. As the state champion, Messiah received a $200 award, and Knightdale High received $500 towards the purchase of poetry books. She will go on to represent North Carolina at the national competition in May, competing for a $20,000 college scholarship. Arts education creates well-rounded students, helping them hone their 4C skills of communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. It's exciting to see our students excel at this high level. Congratulations again, Messiah, and best of luck in the national competition. Finally, this evening, I feel compelled to address an event that was literally happening while we were meeting during our last regular board meeting on March 16th. That afternoon and evening, 8 people were killed in a series of tragic shootings in Atlanta. 6 of the 8 were Asian American women. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, crimes against Asian Americans have risen dramatically. Recent reports indicate nearly 3,800 instances of discrimination against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the past year. As a school system committed to serving all children, we are compelled to see, understand, and interrupt racism in all its forms. This means speaking up when we see injustices. Our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with the families and friends of the Atlanta shootings. But I want to remind all of us why a mass shooting in Atlanta matters to a student or staff member in Wake County. In its simplest form, our students notice. our staff members notice. They need to know that we all notice, because no one can do their best when they believe that they are a target or feel left to fend for themselves. That is one reason that our fifth core belief calls for a diverse school community that is inviting, respectful, inclusive, flexible, and supportive. For us to make progress as a school system, it is critical that we live our core beliefs. Thank you. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. Just starting out with our comments first, I hope everyone had a wonderful, restful spring break, and also enjoyed a wonderful and restful holiday weekend this past weekend. The Easter holiday and coming back from spring break just sort of reminds us or opens up just that we're in that time of springtime, and that is a time of opening and flowers blooming and blossoming and that sort of thing. And it is fitting that we are also in the midst of our own opening as a district. So I want to say welcome again to our superintendent leadership team. Glad you all are here. It's good to see you all back in the room. And as we open up, good to see also again our community members and parents and folks that come to address us. So we just have the Blythes with us this afternoon. But thank you all for being here, and good to see you all as well. And all of these are just signs of our continuing to slowly, cautiously, but deliberately open back up. So as we move to returning to face-to-face instruction with our students over the course of this week, traditional students coming back on Thursday, it is definitely an exciting time, but also one that requires us to continue to be cautious and thoughtful, that it is not time to open up full bore, but to continue to wear our masks, to continue to wash our hands, continue to be maintain a safe and social distance as we again move back into daily face-to-face instruction at all levels. So I just encourage all those that are listening, all of our students, families, staff, as I'm sure everyone is moving towards continuing to vaccinate, and those that we move to, I think, Group 5 later this week. And at that point, everyone, my understanding, now has access to a vaccine. So we certainly encourage you to do so. And again, step up and take that shot. And last but not least, thank you, Superintendent Moore. As I talk about being thoughtful and deliberate and intentional, thank you for your thoughtful comments and remarks today as you recognize our custodial team, Young Messiah, and also Asian Americans across the world and the country. And so thank you for those thoughtful remarks, as again, we continue to be thoughtful as a district to move forward in the opening. And so welcome to all of you, and welcome spring. Vice Chairman Haffey.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And I echo your sentiments on Superintendent Moore's comments. Certainly our Asian American community has felt an additional nerve struck during this pandemic, and certainly the events of 2 weeks ago elevated that even more so. I want to welcome back our teachers and on the traditional calendar as they get ready for Plan A going through our 6th through 12th grade, and to welcome our students on Thursday. We know that this is a lift, and we hope you are able to enjoy your spring break as you come back into the classroom with a new look to your furniture and to your room and what your classes will look like. And also, it is Assistant Principals Week. So thank you to our assistant principals throughout the district for all of the work that you do in helping our teachers, our principals, and the rest of our school staff and students during the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Haffey. Start with our board members in the back this time. So, Mrs. Cash, if you're ready, I will start with you.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. Actually, I don't have a lot to add. I do appreciate the fact that so many of our principals and teachers are working to get ready for this week for everybody to come back, and I know it'll be exciting. I'll be at one of the schools, but I will not be in their way. And it was by an invitation, so I appreciated that. And but I am really looking forward to that, and it has been good visiting other schools as I've this last week or so. But I do thank all of our administrators for what they're accomplishing at this point. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Cash. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you. Not a lot either, other than to say thank you, Superintendent Moore, for making sure that all of our community members feel seen and heard by us. We can't ever underestimate the power of words, of acknowledging people, so thank you for doing that from the leadership perspective as well. And again, hats off to all the people who made it possible for a larger group of our students across our district to return in person, and to all of our families and our students who are preparing for what's going to feel like the third or fourth first day of school for many. I wish them all well, and recognizing that, as Ms. Kushner and I both shared, it would be unusual if everybody didn't have a bit of a jitters, but I'm certainly glad for all the work that we've put forward, including every one of us, including our superintendent's leadership team and all the worker bees who have done the behind the scenes to make this possible. And again, we will, I got lots of emails and text messages about walking and chewing gum, and I feel certain that we'll all take heed to that to continue to do the hard work as a team. Thanks, everyone, for making it possible to start to see more of our folks return to in-person.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and good evening, everyone. Superintendent Moore, I also appreciate your words, and the message is important that we need to, we do need to see each other and support each other, so I do appreciate that. And Superintendent Moore also shared the congratulations that I would also like to extend to Messiah Smith at Nightdale High School, and we wish her the best at nationals. Nightdale High School, before the pandemic, was one of the last schools that I visited in normal times. Towards the end of February in 2020, they had their curriculum night, and I just want to again extend my gratitude and praise to the school. They go above and beyond to support their students and have throughout the pandemic, and offering counseling. They had their chat and chew sessions on at lunchtime with counselors prior to the pandemic, and they continue to offer those virtually. And that supportive environment for students, and also being able to collaborate with your fellow teachers, I think is extremely important, and helps students build success so that they can be showcased and highlight their gifts and talents that they have in all of our schools. And then one last thing sitting on the desk of every board member and we'll be hearing about is the superintendent's proposed budget. And I had a Facebook memory come up from 2 years ago, the first time I was sitting, in my seat over there, but with this in front of me as we were hearing from members of the public during the public hearing, and how it struck me that this is a binder in front of us, but knowing that this represents hundreds of thousands of lives. And so as we start to go through this process again in a very public way, I just want to acknowledge that, this education is truly an investment in people, particularly our children, who are our future. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. As my colleagues have said, thank you, Superintendent Moore, for your comments about addressing the Asian American hate crimes. It is so important that we see and address issues. We need to see, acknowledge, and address issues of racism, but we also need a commitment to change systems that create the problems in the first place. And that is my commitment, and it's the commitment of many of us here on this board. On April the 21st, there will be a BAC meeting with District 5. Drew Cook and Paul Coe will have discussions with us that you can sign up through a link at the board calendar in the wcpss.net. About us, find the board, find the board calendar, and that's where you can sign up for the BAC meeting. Thank you to, again, as always, to all teachers, staff, principals, and families as we deal with the challenges of education at any time, but particularly with the challenges here with the COVID pandemic. As we think about going, as we begin the process of transitioning the whole school system to Plan A, I think it's always important to be aware of what our community conditions are. The last 7-day average calculated last night in Wake County, we're at 132 cases per 100,000 population. And just as a reminder, the CDC considers 100 cases per 100,000 population high transmission. So we're at 132. Looking just at the data on the Wake County Public Schools dashboard, the number of student cases is the second highest since the pandemic began. We're just below where we were before coming after the winter holidays. The concerning thing is that we are at the highest number of elementary school cases that we have been at the pandemic. We have particularly seen elementary school cases growing over the last 6 weeks, and the last week of reported data, it's the highest that it's been during the pandemic. So that information, we need to be paying attention to it. I think the most important thing is that as people go into Plan A, recognize where the trends are going. This is a call to be extremely careful, wear your mask, keep distance, and just be extremely careful because the trends are not where they should be, and we need to reverse the trend of the last 6 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Mrs. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and good evening to all my colleagues. I want to echo the remarks of thanks to our staff, every single member, as well as the leadership team, and to Superintendent Moore for the leadership that you showed tonight. We cannot be neutral in the face of racism, sexism, and all bias. So thank you for your opening comments. I want to thank everyone who came out to the District 6 BAC 2 weeks ago before spring break. We had a good discussion about the budget going forward, so very anticipating the budget discussions this evening. I was glad to get a preview from the finance staff. Also wanted to thank the Holly Springs Chamber for inviting my colleagues and I to a breakfast meeting where I was still conscious of eating breakfast in a Zoom meeting. Dr. Martin was braver than I, but it was great to get an update on the exciting new news from Holly Springs, as well as the joint commissioners meeting that we had prior to spring break. Very appreciative of the support the commissioners have given our district, our teachers, and our school district during this pandemic. And today, Superintendent Moore and I had great fun of a dedication to Dr. Mary Ann Wheeler, the outgoing principal of Olds Elementary. She's been there for 24 years, and the leadership and the change that she brought to the school is going to be, she's left her indelible mark on that wonderful school community. So wonderful best wishes to Dr. Wheeler as she enters retirement, and Mr. Moore, the new principal, has big shoes to fill. So congratulations to the Olds community and to Dr. Wheeler.
Thank you, Mrs. Kushner. Ms. Carter.
Thank you. Well, I hope everyone had a nice break, and kind of seems like a while back, but before the break, I had the opportunity to attend a family engagement night for the Connections Academy, and I just have to say the staff there are just amazing. They had car decorations. They had take-home activities for the students and families and some goodie bags, and just seeing the families drive through, students, in the car as well, and it was just a great activity. And I know it was right before spring break, but they were all there showing the support, and just, to me, it really spoke to the name of the school, Connections. It was really seeing that in action, and speak very highly of just that entire amazing team there. So just wanted to thank them for including me on that. I really appreciated it. And just thinking again, I know opening up and having to rearrange schedules, kindergarten up has been a lot on data managers, administrators, and just our teachers, custodians, instructional assistants, just preparing for all the changes either already occurred this week, depending on your calendar, or getting ready to in a few days. So just wanted to thank everyone. And a quick reminder, District 9 has a back meeting in 2 days. Yeah, Thursday at 5:30. And then this Sunday at 4 p.m., I will have a District 9 connection meeting. So just a reminder, all those in District 9, if you're interested. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. And Mr. Hagen.
Well, thank you. Well, I think between yourself and all of our colleagues, we've addressed most of the things that I would have wanted to address. Important events in our community have been noted, as well as what's, the events of this week. All I will add is that, this is, as you mentioned, springtime. It's a time of renewal. It's a time of hope. Just as we all come together in the face of whatever transition, if it's responding to adversity, responding to horrible events in the community, or just coming together and seeing people face to face again, we really need to strive to reconnect, to restore connections that might have been stressed during isolation, during contention, during all the adversity we've all faced. And so for some of us, for some people out there, these next few weeks may be difficult. They may be difficult coming back together, and we just all need to work together, be aware of everyone's individual stresses and struggles, and know that we're all in this together. And if we do that, we can make the best of it and go forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hagen. Well, that concludes our board member comments. Thank you all again for your thoughts and your consideration. Moving on to our agenda, if I can now this time entertain a motion to approve tonight's meeting agenda.
Chair Sutton, I make a motion to approve tonight's meeting agenda.
Second.
I had a motion from Ms. Mahaffey, second from Mrs. Johnson-Hostler to approve tonight's meeting agenda as printed and as posted. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by a sign of aye. Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Tonight's meeting agenda is approved. Moving to public comment, residents wishing to address Wake County Board of Education may submit their comments or video by noon the day of our meeting. That link can be found at www.wcpss.net. Based upon capacity restrictions due to COVID-19, limited attendance and in-person public comment is allowed. The guidelines for in-person attendance and public comment can be found also on our district website designated at the place designated for school board business, and that can be found at the tab About Us, again on our website. Any member of the public who is unable or does not wish to attend in person may provide comments in writing or again by posting a video using the instructions on our website. The following citizens have submitted comments as part of our public comment portion of tonight's agenda. Their comments are linked on the same online agenda we are using for tonight's meeting. That agenda, as well as the guidelines for those wishing to submit comments for future meetings, can also be found at our website under the tab labeled School Board. We have 15 written comments from members of the public. The topics and speakers whose comments are attached to this agenda are as follows. There are 12 speakers who have submitted comments regarding Peace Builders behavior/crisis intervention program. So again, of the 15 comments, there are 12 on Peace Builders. And then there are 3 other topics, include one on info to parents regarding summer learning program, watch the variants, high school students returning, and regression of school format illegal medical interventions. So those are the additional 3 topics that are part of public comment. So board members and those that wish to see those comments, again, they can be found on our website and they are attached to the agenda. We have two in-person speakers tonight, so I'll call on them at this time. The first is Carrie Bly. And as you approach the podium, again, there are sanitizing wipes and supplies there for your use if you need them.
Thank you. I'm going to run over a little, and I've been good for 2 years, so I don't think I'm going to feel bad about it, okay? The only reason that we have these incomplete math resources for my children is because they were created to align to the Common Core standards, and it's a trajectory that North Carolina is committed to following. You cannot be honest about the origin and intent of these new math curriculums because the public believes that the Common Core standards were removed due to Senate Bill 812 and because you tell us they were. But other school districts across the nation are not encumbered by having to maintain a deception like that. And their staff stand at a similar podium and tell their board members that they have selected Open Up Resources middle school curriculum because it is high quality and because they know it is authored by one of the lead writers of the Common Core standards, William McCallum, and they say, we waited a long time for these, and we wanted the best for our students, so we went straight to the source. And we keep asking you if North Carolina still aligns to the Common Core standards, not because we need an answer, but we keep asking you that question to see if you have the integrity to understand your own history. And it's become deeply unsettling that as a board and as staff, you don't seem to be able to communicate that you have a healthy working knowledge of that history, where you've been, how you got to where you are today, and where you're going to take our children in the future. So we're rightfully concerned that your allegiance to an initiative, above all else, may cloud your judgment and prevent you from looking at your academic endeavors with the objectivity they deserve. Because just at a base level, love or hate Common Core, the first question I had upon hearing that other school board meeting was, where's the high school curriculum developed by the Common Core authors? If mere proximity to the creators of the standards is the new watermark for high-quality curricula, then I'd like to see how they communicate the hard stuff, and I'm wondering why you didn't select that curriculum. But you already know the answer. There is nothing to compare. After 11 years, they can't write a math question above an 8th grade level aligned to their own standards as we stand here today. So when it came time for you to adopt a high school math curriculum, the only thing you could find and the absolute best you could put in front of my children was a math program authored by 5 people in Utah, and that doesn't make logical sense. We've had to endure Dr. Martin telling us that he believes Pete and I are here for 2 years because we just want you to make learning math easy for our children, and he assures me you are not going to do that. He believes that, in his expert opinion, over 3,000 negative surveys on your MVP math program imply that innovation brings backlash, and that negative responses from the community only serve to demonstrate that the higher rigor of your new math programs is working precisely the way you should, and your arrogance is something I've never seen before. Please don't ask or demand that my children expand their critical thinking when the adults in the room cannot hold themselves to the same standards. Because the rhetoric that you give to us in defense of these curriculums, they're not your words, and they're not your personal theories, and they're not your ideas, they're somebody else's. And I want you to start thinking for yourself.
Thank you, Mrs. Bly. Peter Bly.
Since I'm proud of my wife and I very much support the words she wrote, I'm going to finish her speech. Because children may be intellectually challenged, they may have a mindset problem, they may be disorganized, those are certainly possibilities. But if you stand up here and tell us that Wake County has provided a viable math curriculum for your secondary students since 2004, then that might be the first big piece of the puzzle I'd throw up on the table as the most likely culprit for stagnant student achievement. Do you think? Because in our humble opinion, you still haven't provided your students with a viable math curriculum as we stand here today. The only thing you have really done wrong in this room is fail to adopt, implement, and evaluate these new curriculums for what they really are. These curriculums are mere prototypes. If good science is good observation, then you need to start observing very closely what was happening with your students and teachers in these classes. You have no useful data to even combat our concerns. Our kids are not cannon fodder. They're not lab rats. They should not be up for sale to the highest curriculum bidder. There's no reason or theology or marching order that should ever prevent you or a teacher or a parent from being able to use their better judgment to help a student learn in any way they know how, none whatsoever. But I am begging you, as board and staff members, to keep asking the common sense questions and keep asking them until you get answers that make sense to you as independent intellectuals, because that's the only reason you should be sitting in those chairs, and that's all we've ever asked you to do. With my remaining time, don't have time to go through everything that I had that I was going to write today. The gist is, we both feel very strongly that a majority of you think we're just angry parents. And you're right, we are angry. Today marks the exact 2-year anniversary that we started coming here to start talking to you all, and we have not taken even one step further forward. We are angry because we're not being heard, or furthermore, we're being talked down to by people, some of you, not all, who seem to think that they can parent my children better than I can. With all of that being said, I'm going to leave all of you with one last thing. It's something from Lauren Isley. It's called The Story of the Starfish. One day, a man was walking along the beach when he noticed a boy picking something up and gently throwing it into the ocean. Approaching the boy, he asked, "What are you doing?" The youth replied, "Throwing starfish back into the ocean. The surf is up and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them back, they'll die." "Son," the man said, "don't you realize there are miles and miles of beach and hundreds of starfish? You can't make a difference." After listening politely, the boy bent down, picked up another starfish, threw it back into the surf, then smiling at the man, he said, "I made a difference for that one." I implore you, and everyone listening to this meeting online, stop being the old man. Start being the young boy. I know these issues seem too big to fix sometimes, whether it's in-person school or math and EL curriculums. Stop letting the size of the issue or the lack of funding or, heaven forbid, having to admit you may have made a mistake with a curriculum stop you from doing what is right for our kids. It will make a difference for them, and they deserve your utmost efforts. Thank you.
Mr. and Mrs. Blau, thank you. And I'll just take a quick moment of personal privilege and just say to you both, while there is obviously some disagreement on where we all stand on the issue, I appreciate your tenacity, your diligence, and most of all, I appreciate your respect. You all always adhere to the time frame. You never come and you raise your voice. You're always respectful, and I do want to tell you that I don't think we all appreciate that. And so, again, I appreciate your respect, your tenacity, and I will say that we do hear you. We hear you. So thank you for what it's worth. So moving on with our agenda, we've got a couple of items on our information agenda. I won't say most importantly, but probably the most anticipated, is presentation of the superintendent's proposed 2021-2022 budget. So Superintendent Moore, I'll turn it over to you to present your budget, and I think from there we'll go to Mr. Nieder.
Good evening, Chair Sutton and board members. It is impossible to look forward to the coming school year without looking back at how COVID-19 redefined our school operations. In partnership with Wake County and other community partners, the district has distributed more than 8 million meals outside of school to keep children fed. About 88,000 technology devices have been distributed so students can remain connected. More than 85,000 students attended a virtual academy that did not exist a year ago. Countless hours have been spent creating, revising, and adjusting academic routines. Throughout it all, I found myself returning to our district's core beliefs. You may recall last year's budget message spoke to our first core belief. Every student is uniquely capable and deserves to be challenged and engaged in relevant, rigorous, and meaningful learning each day. It is our first core belief because it is the cornerstone of our work. But there's another core belief that I want to highlight today. It states that the Board of Education, superintendent, and all staff, while sustaining best practices, will promote and support a culture of continuous improvement, risk-taking, and innovation that results in a high-performing organization focused on student achievement. Our stakeholders were not thinking about a pandemic when they helped write this core belief, but the risk, innovation, and continuous improvement it addresses were tested daily this past year. We succeeded in many areas. At times we stumbled, and we incurred new costs along the way. It is those costs and the use of millions of dollars in COVID-19 relief funds you will find addressed in my 2021-2022 proposed budget. More specifically, this year's proposed budget addresses two main needs. The first is a request to our county commissioners to make permanent the $11.9 million in one-time funding provided last year. Commissioners generously provided this amount to the school district last year at a time when the future of our local economy was extremely uncertain. With many of those uncertainties now removed, I am requesting that that funding become permanent. The second request is familiar to you and to those who have followed our conversations with county commissioners regarding the district's multi-year funding plan. Funding in this area was not addressed in last year's budget due to the pandemic. I'm asking that an additional $16.3 million become a part of the county's annual appropriation to the school district to resume work in this area. It is critical to our continuity of operations as we return to a traditional school year. You might recall that one key area of the multi-year funding plan was the need to increase counselors, psychologists, and social workers. This was an acute need before the pandemic. Teachers routinely told us that significant academic progress was intertwined with stronger social and emotional supports for students. As the pandemic enters its second year, the need for counselors, psychologists, and social workers is now painfully obvious. With these two additional items, I am recommending a request of $28,249,992 in additional funding from county commissioners for the 2021-2022 school year. This request reflects two financial realities of the pandemic year. The first is that county services and school operations are still difficult to fully predict following the upheaval of the last 12 months. While we anticipate larger financial requests in future years, I feel the school system and county would best be served by a more modest request for 21-22. The second financial reality is that federal CARES Act funding, which has been a tremendous benefit to the WCPSS, is still being distributed and set aside for future expenses related to the pandemic. While we could spend every CARES Act dollar on immediate academic needs, we must be mindful of a lesson other districts learned during the Great Recession in 2009. Namely, if we spread the use of additional federal funding over a longer time period, it will reduce the need to cut services and personnel when the flow of money ends. This approach has the added benefit of reducing the amount immediately requested of the county. This is because federal dollars have been used and will continue to be used to meet pressing needs. Despite the challenges caused by the pandemic, thousands of employees and students have succeeded this year. It would be easy and wrong to overlook those accomplishments today. For example, our graduation rate is the highest in the district's history at 90.8%. African American students, English language learners, and students with disabilities exceeded the district's growth rate, which is what is necessary to close achievement gaps. The graduation rate at 70% of our high schools now exceeds 90%. 9 schools posted graduation rates above 95%, including 5 with a graduation rate of 100%. We have led the nation yet again in the number of educators earning national board certification in our classrooms, and that for 15 consecutive years now. Magnet Schools of America named 39 of 54 Wake County magnet schools as either schools of excellence or schools of distinction. 5 of the top 20 schools of excellence nationwide are part of WCPSS, according to MSA. Numerous teachers, principals, and staff members were honored with regional, state, and national awards. In much the same way I opened this message, I am closing with a reference to our district's core beliefs. The 6th core belief states, Wake County residents value a strong public school system and will partner to provide the support and resources to fully realize our shared vision, accomplish the mission, and sustain our core beliefs. This has been a difficult year for everyone, but the challenges have also highlighted the wisdom of those in our community who helped develop the core beliefs that guide us. Public education is the foundation of a strong community. And despite its heavy toll, the pandemic has also revealed the strength of our foundations. I believe this proposed budget allows us to simultaneously build on that foundation and weather the remaining challenges of COVID-19. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to David Nieder to provide highlights of the budget.
As Mr. Nieder has commented, thank you, Superintendent Moore, for those remarks, and we certainly appreciate those as well as the outlook of the district, and look forward to receiving the budget.
Okay, if I could ask Ms. Kimsey to bring up the PowerPoint deck, please. Great, thank you. Good evening, Chair Sutton, members of the board, and Superintendent Moore. Tonight we are presenting to you the superintendent's proposed 2021-22 operating budget. But before we jump into the actual budget, we will share some information with you on the background of the landscape that the budget was developed within, and also whatever we can forecast for the landscape into the coming fiscal year. We're going to share with you potential risks associated with this budget. Any budget is based on assumptions and estimates that until the future happens will not be known if they are accurate or not, and which direction they are or not accurate. And then we'll review with you highlights of the actual budget and then lay out a path of next steps. Next slide, please. 12 months ago, as we stood before you presenting a proposed budget, it was amidst incredible fiscal uncertainty, let alone all the other uncertainty related to the pandemic. I'm going to limit it, though, just to the fiscal uncertainty. While there still is a lot unknown looking forward, there is a lot known today, and we are on much more solid ground today than we were, I believe, a year ago. Concerns of a major ongoing recession have been relieved. The pandemic, while it did impact the economy, and it unfortunately impacted some sectors of the economy more than others, and some at certain income levels more than others, but looking at it as a whole, it did not impact the economy extensively, and it was relatively short-lived. I believe it started in February, and it was over officially by early April of 2020. The significant stimulus funding, multiple rounds, further assisted with mitigating economic impact from the pandemic. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through a few slides just to show you where we've come. This is the unemployment data. And the top line, the blue line, is national, the red line is the state, and the greenish line is Wake County. You can see that huge spike up in the March-April timeframe of last year, just when the pandemic was really creeping into the United States. But then you see over the period of the calendar year, and then into early this year, the rates, while they're not 100% down to where they were, they're almost there. And you see how rapidly that took place. And I'll compare and contrast that to the Great Recession, where it took years for those rates to come down. Next slide, please. This slide is provided by Dr. Michael Walden, an economist with the North Carolina NC State University. It's a chart of leading indicators, and it goes all the way back. This goes back to 2007. But it's basically a forecast of how strong the economy looks going forward. And the higher the number, the better. So you can see for that period of February 2019 to February 2020, relatively flat. And then a huge downturn in March of 20. But then you see by the end of the year, and then by March 2021, right back where we were before, pre-pandemic, if not a little bit higher. So again, just another data point to show the very quick turnaround. Next slide, please. Going to just share a few more slides on the economy, and we'll jump into the next step. These next slides, the source for them is the legislature's Fiscal Research Division in North Carolina. And the data that you're going to see on these slides was included in a February 2021 report that was released. The takeaway from this first slide, forecast revenue collections for the current year, $4 billion higher than projected. Next slide, please. And again, not intending to go through the slide, but again, their conclusion, the impact of the recession was not widespread. Most middle and upper income households experienced little economic distress. And this is where I say that it has impacted some. Service workers and part-time workers were hit the hardest. We still have 200,000 fewer jobs in this sector than a year ago. Next slide, please. And this slide, and there are a number of slides, looks at the Buyin from 2021 all the way through 2023. And again, the takeaway from this slide is that the economic projections look strong through this entire period. Next slide, please. The last two slides that I'm going to talk about on the state economy are really just some bullets. I'm not going to read the bullets, but there's some takeaways from the actual work that they did. Some of the, a big part of the recovery has been the stimulus checks that have flowed into households that they in turn have turned back into spending through the economy. Forecasts anticipate consumers will significantly increase spending on leisure and hospitality services. Obviously, they've been shut down, so as they open, that will improve. Next slide, please. And similar on this slide, but on this slide, you'll actually see some potential cultural paradigm shifts where things may never be the same as they were pre-pandemic. Shrinking commercial real estate. Just in the last week, I had heard previously that it was anticipated by 2030 that about a third of the malls, indoor shopping malls in the country would be shuttered. I more recently, last week, heard a revised estimate from a couple of areas that within the next couple of years, we may reach that goal of a third of the malls being shuttered. So that doesn't mean the business is changing, the economy is changing. It means that the shopping is being done in a different venue, as everyone knows, electronically. Next slide, please. And last, I'll come to Wake County. How's Wake County doing? I would say parallel and well to the national and state economies, if not even perhaps a little bit better because of the wealth and balance and diversity we have in the economy in this area and then within Wake County. The commissioners held a financial planning retreat back on March 29th. I'm not going to go into that, but there's a hot link embedded in the presentation, and the materials you see up on the screen are also in Assembly. So you can get to that through that hot link if you want to take a look at it. And I'm sure as we go through the budget process and work with the commissioners and the joint meeting that will be had in the near future, we'll hear more about the county's health as well. Next slide, please. So I want to switch now to the federal stimulus. We all know that this is one-time funding. Because we know that, we concurrently are intentionally building up reserves of fund balance to manage a future or the future fiscal cliff, or cliffs, because they're really multiple cliffs. The good news is that this federal funding, and one of the next two slides you'll see, can be used over a number of years. We similarly have a number of years to plan for that transition from using federal funding to finding other sources for whatever purpose it was being used, or phasing out whatever service may have been provided. That said, it still behooves us to do that planning now at the front end. We can't wait. And again, you will see that this parallels very closely the process we went through as it relates to managing transition and the funding cliffs through the Great Recession. Next slide, please. Again, the board has had several detailed reviews of the federal CARES funding, I think most recently in February at your Finance Committee meeting. Do not intend to do that again tonight. But what you see on this slide are the three primary rounds of funding, the first being in the spring of 2020, the next one being at the end of December 2020, and the most recent one under the Biden administration that went into law on March 11th. Next slide. And here you get a bit of a sense of the economic impact of those three rounds of funding, or at least what we know as of now. If you look to the second fiscal line where it says Wake County Public School System total, we received $50.7 million of CRF funds last year. That includes funding that we received through Wake County government. They were actual CARES funds that they received that they in turn appropriated or distributed to Wake County Public Schools for our use. They were used largely for student device acquisition and acquisition of PPE and cleaning supplies. So that was $50 million. In addition, we received $27 million of ESSER 1 funding. And if you look at the bottom, you see that that ESSER 1 funding is available for use through September of 2022, over a year out. That first category through December of 2021 originally was December of 2020, but they extended that. And then we received $5.3 million of gear funding available through September of 2022. Now you get into the next category, and these are funds that have been put into law that we fully anticipate receiving, but we have not gotten the final allotment, so we don't know the exact number, but we anticipate under ESSER 2 that Wake County will receive $96 million of additional federal funds that are available for use all the way through fall of 2023. And we believe that to be a good estimate. And then last, under ESSER 3, which was just signed into law this spring earlier, we do not know the amount, but as you can see, Terry's got on this chart what percent of the state total we received, and the allotment is not on an ADM basis. It's partially ADM, but it's also wealth-based and student need-based. So you know that we're about 10% as far as ADM. We represent about 10% of the student population statewide. We've been receiving, with the exception of CRF, 6 or 7% of the total state funding allotment. We do know that the state is receiving $3.6 billion in ESSER 3, so I can let you do the math, and I'm not saying that is the amount that will be allotted. We don't know what their final formula will be, but it might be a ballpark if you took 6 or 7% times that $3.6 billion, a big number to assist us and to invest in our district. The funding in some of these areas is targeted for specific use. We're not going to get into that today. However, most of the funding is available and it has flexibility associated with it. And again, all of this funding is intended to cover unanticipated and unfunded, unbudgeted costs, services that need to be provided, for example, to make up learning opportunities that we would otherwise not have funding for, and also to provide a bridge of any other unmet funding needs through the economic uncertainty to get to the other side. And again, there are many parallels how we will manage this funding to the way we managed the funding, albeit was much less during the Great Recession, the ARA funds. Next slide, please. Now I want to talk briefly about potential risks. As I said earlier, putting together a budget requires estimating things, forecasting things, and then waiting until those that are actually part of whatever was forecast or projected show up, like the number of students that show up for Wake County Public Schools or Wake County Charter Schools. We have estimates of what the state's going to do as it relates to funding. Until the state legislature acts, we don't know. We have estimates of what the state will legislate as far as salary increases. They might do more, they might do less, and those have implications on this proposed budget. So that's what these potential risks really speak to. I do want to just highlight a couple of these. The state held harmless provision, which was in place this year. We're anticipating that they will continue that held harmless on ADM based upon student counts in the coming year. But if they do not, there will be a significant fiscal impact. We're forecasting that the state will legislate 3% compensation increases for all categories of staff, and we built in the local funding that would be required for that. Obviously, the state would cover any state-funded employees. They could come in higher, they could come in lower. That will have implications on this proposed budget. And the last thing I'll mention before we go on, and you've heard me mention this previously, is the child nutrition operation and child nutrition revenues. Had significant impact in the current year, obviously with school shut down initially. And even when they came back, having a significant number of students in the virtual academy. One saving grace has been, for the current year, we have been able to put CARES funding to support that operation, some other local funding sources to support that operation, given other operational savings we've had this year. But we're going to have to watch closely, and I heard earlier today you were hearing about virtual academy for the coming year, what impacts that will have on the CNS operation, and what adjustments we need to make. Again, I just want to keep that on your radar. We certainly are, and we're doing some behind-the-scenes work, and we'll bring, as appropriate and necessary, we'll be bringing information back to you. But we want to watch that very closely. And again, we're also fortunate on that the federal reimbursements have now been extended for all students through September 30th of this year. So that's a plus. Next slide, please. Okay, jumping into the actual budget. It's a $1.9 billion total proposed operating budget. And as I said, it assumes that the state continues to hold us harmless. As you heard from Superintendent Moore, it makes the request for that $11.9 million one-time increase for the current year to remain in a recurring manner. And it also requests an additional increase of $16.3 million in county appropriation. It also does invest a significant amount of fund balance to balance the budget, just over $20 million. The current year's budget had, I believe, somewhere between $8 and $9 million invested to balance the budget. And again, this is something that's been done strategically. As you heard me say earlier, we have intentionally been building up that unassigned fund balance. When we put forth the amount of fund balance to balance the current year budget of, I think it was $8.7 million, we had unassigned fund balance available to use it was in the $12 million range. We are now recommending this investment of $20 million, knowing that we've got a built-up balance of $35 million. And as we continue through this year, based on our capacity to use federal funding and based upon other operational savings, we believe that once we know what our unassigned fund balance becomes on June 30th of 2021, we will build that back up again. That is the goal. Next slide, please. This slide just shows you how our operating dollars, or not how, but where they are spent, and no significant changes here. The funding goes to the schools. You can see the biggest part of the pie, blue, 88% of our operational funding goes to schools, but I would posit it's well over 90% because when you see facilities and operations, that's not the building program, that's maintenance and operations. And the day-to-day maintenance and facilities. That's really going directly to the schools too, but what you're seeing in this pie is how we are required to account for the funding. There's the charter school local pass-through piece, 2%. The Board of Education Superintendent's Office, Communications Chief of Staff, Chief of Schools, Academic Advancement, Administrative Services, and Technology Services. The only other thing I'll point out, and it's not on a slide, but as a result of the federal stimulus, the ratio of our three primary funding sources has shifted a little bit for the current year. Usually federal funding makes up about 8% of the total operating budget. Now it's, I believe, closer to 13%. So just for your information. Next slide, please. These are the categories of funding requests that you will find in the budget. I'm not going to go through them. There has been no change from prior year over these categories. Next slide, please. So now let me actually get into what is in the budget in these different categories, the highlights. The legislative impact category, which requires $16.2 million of local funding. $2 million is not for Wake County, it's for charter school payment growth. $5 million is for our estimated employer state benefit rate increases. The two primary ones there are the health insurance rates, the health insurance that we provide, and the retirement contribution that we as an employer are required to put in. $4.6 million for the final year of the K-3 class size, the local portion of that. And then those additional amounts are the local portion of that estimated 3% increase that we are anticipating that the state will legislate. Next slide, please. The next category of operating costs of new schools, $3.7 million of local funding will be required. We have one new school opening, Willow Springs High. And again, that local funding covers the areas you see underneath there and many more. But these are only the fixed costs associated with opening the school. They are not the per pupil or additional student costs. Next slide, please. When it comes to new students, that's where this is. And we have simply taken the student counts projected for next year, and with our current funding formulas and allotment formulas, calculated the amount of local funding that will be required. Next slide, please. Program continuity, a relatively small amount being requested here, and the primary use of that is to cover increased costs for the dental insurance that we provide for employees, and that we can absorb that internally as an employer and not have to pass that along to the employees through an increased monthly contribution. Next slide, please. Similarly, we've got leases throughout the district that have escalation clauses in them. So each year it may be a 2 or 3% escalation, and that's the main requirement under this funding request. Next slide, please. I want to spend some time on this one. It's very important. This next category of deferred operational needs began a couple years ago as a 5-year funding initiative to focus on areas needing significant investment, going really all the way back to the Great Recession, if not before the Great Recession. And it was a way to recognize we have a large need that cannot be met just in 1 year, but to say, let's start on it and have a multi-year way or approach to achieving some real material progress. And the areas include non-certified staff pay, maintenance and operations funding to maintain our buildings, our current buildings, and instructional support technicians. There are other multi-year initiatives I'm going to get to as well, but they were not considered to be deferred operational needs. Unfortunately, these initiatives, with a minor exception, took a back seat during the current year, or during the proposed budget for the current year. However, our proposed budget for 21-22 brings them all back. A couple changes. We have taken what was initially intended to be a 5-year funding rollout and now add a 6th year to spread that out even further. And for the 21-22 year, some of the funding for these initiatives, and I'll walk up to the slide in a minute, is coming from federal funding, not from local funding. So going back into the slide, there's a request for $6.4 million for non-certified, to apply against the non-certified compensation schedules. And again, details of that, once we know what funding is available, we'll make recommendations to the board, and the board will discuss that at length. $1.4 million to apply against the certified salary supplement schedule. You'll recall that several years ago, we changed that from being a percentage-based supplement to a fixed dollar amount supplement. So without doing something, making some adjustment to that schedule each year being a fixed dollar amount, it would become stale over time. And so it is very important that we continue to focus on that each year. And we're utilizing the federal funding to support the multi-year funding request for the maintenance and operations formula alignment and the instructional support technicians and technology services, recognizing that over time we will need to find other funding sources beyond the federal one-time funding sources to maintain those services. Next slide, please. Then we get to the new or expanding programs category. $7.9 million of local funding is required to support this. The first item, I'm going to go down the slide, is a request and recommendation to take our instructional assistants from their current work assignment of 9.3 months to an assignment of 10 months. Little background. Pre-Great Recession, they were all 10 months. During the Great Recession, as a means to balance the budget, we took them from 10 months down to 9.3 months. And what's the difference? Under 9.3 months, the IAs are only in place on days the students are in. Under the 10 months, they're in on all other days too, including days prior to school opening and preparing for school opening and other days, teacher work days. And so we believe this is very important. It was something we did. It wasn't an ideal situation, but it was something we did to balance the budget many years ago. So we're excited to recommend that and look forward to see if that can get across the finish line. There's an adjustment for the assistant principal formula change for elementary and high. There's a recommended grade adjustment, which effectively becomes a pay adjustment for high school bookkeepers and data managers. There's a small amount for receptionist positions at high schools, some additional funding for magnet schools, and then this next and last item on the slide is another multi-year funding request, and it's related to social school support for SEL. And that was a multi-year request that was going to be $36.9 million. And the recommendation is to invest $8 million of the federal funding. The that's available into this initiative for the year. And again, similar to the other multi-year initiatives where we're using federal funding to support that, over time, over the next several years, we're going to need to find ways to transition off that federal funding onto other funding sources. So we recognize that up front. Next slide, please. You probably see this better in your book or on your computer, but if you were keeping track of all those local funding requirements for each of those categories, you probably added up a number greater than $40 million, and yet you've heard from both Superintendent Moore and me that this proposed budget only requests flat year-over-year funding in an additional $16.3 million, not some $40 million. This schedule, which can be found in the actual budget document, goes through the reconciliation process, as we've been through for some of the board members that have been through a budget cycle before. It's not quite as simple as just adding up the adds to get to the net. And again, don't intend to go through this today, but if this is something the board would like us to go through in one of the work sessions to get a better understanding, we will certainly entertain that. Next slide, please. Just a couple other things to note. This proposed budget does invest, as I said earlier, $20.1 million in fund balance, and that does exceed the 50% threshold. And so if this does continue forward, prior to approving the proposed budget, the board will also need to waive fund balance policy. The board has done that in the past, and it became on a regular basis during the Great Recession. So I anticipate we may be revisiting that as we're working, balancing use of federal funding and fund balance and shifting over the next few years. Next slide, please. Just very brief orientation of the budget document. This is a hot link that's available in the PDF. It's available, the superintendent's proposed budget as I speak should be online for the public to look at. And as we go through the different phases of this, once the superintendent proposes it, and I'll get into this in the timelines, the board will discuss it. The board will then ultimately approve a proposed budget. That document will be loaded for the public to see. And then ultimately on the other side of the county's final budget and the state's final budget, the board will have a final adopted budget, and that too will be posted online. Next slide, please. This is just, again, a snapshot of the table of contents in your actual budget document. But at the front end, it's just high-level information about the budget, what's coming from federal, what's coming from state, what's coming from local, some things related to the county appropriation and the increase requests. There's information about the potential risks that I briefly spoke about. There's detailed information about our projections for membership data, student projections. There's some comparisons, funding comparisons to other peer districts, comparing Wake to others. Then there's a summary of all the funding requests, a section on our organization, including information about the Board of Education, our organizational structure, our budget policies and practices, financial information, including revenues and budget by object code and staff budgets. If anyone wants to really drill down and get into the details, looking at both the current year budget and what's in the proposed year budget, and compare the two. And then finally, the last section is funding requests, which is the detail of what's included in each business case. Next slide, please. So next steps. As you begin looking through the budget document, I'm sure you will have questions. We will ask that the board members send any and all questions that they have to Terry Kimsey. Her email address is there. Once or as we receive those, Terry will in turn distribute them to who's most appropriate to answer those questions. Some may wind up in academics, some will certainly stay in budget and finance. They go all over the place. We will, depending on when we receive the questions, we will try to turn them back around to the board and the public prior to your next work session. And when I say to the public, we'll post the questions and responses online. We will certainly bring them back to you at your April 20th work session. And that April 20th, you'll potentially have 2 work sessions on the budget. The first will be in the Finance Committee meeting. That will be the primary topic for the Finance Committee on April 20th, a budget work session. And then as needed, will flow into the actual board work session with that budget work session. That evening, at your board meeting on the 20th, there'll be a public hearing on the budget. At some point, I don't know if the date has been set yet, there'll be a joint boards meeting between the Board of Education and the Board of Commissioners discussing the budget. And then there'll be additional work sessions as necessary. Ideally, we would arrive at a proposed budget approved by the board by their May 4th meeting, realizing that's a very compressed time frame that may not be achievable. We can certainly work around that with a specially called meeting or some other things, just knowing that we've got to, by statute, we've got to get to the county commissioners the board's proposed budget by May 15th. And because of publication and some other things, we need a couple days between the 15th and final decisions in order to pull that together. So next slide. So in the board work sessions themselves, again, it's an opportunity for us to share responses to your questions, but perhaps more importantly, it's the opportunity for the board to have discussion about the proposed budget and provide direction to the superintendent and staff about changes that they would like to see within the proposed budget. Again, I ask that you direct any questions to Terry Kimsey, our Senior Director of Budget. Today's presentation was for informational purposes, but if there are any questions, and if the board chair would like, I would be glad to entertain them.
Again, Ms. Nita, thank you for your high-level presentation. As he indicated, this is for informational purposes at this time, but if any board members have any high-level questions at this point, I'll take a few, but we don't want to sort of delve into any details at this time. But any, again, high-level questions that he could answer, particularly from his presentation, we'll take those now. Vice Chairman Happy.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sutton, and thank you, Mr. Nieder and Superintendent Moore. I simply had a question that's a bit pandemic related. Normally, we have our public hearing, it's open, it's here, and we have folks come in. Has the operation of what that public hearing is going to look like been discussed?
We are in the process of that. Because yes, as you point out, that's very different.
Thank you very much.
I was just thinking about that as well, and I think one option may also be, I don't know if board members have remaining BAC meetings between now and the end of the year. This may be a time to utilize your BAC meetings just for that. I'm hoping that between now and the end of the year, with so much already being on our staff and principals, that we don't have a plan to have too many more BAC meetings at this time. And if you're done for the year, then that would be great. But if you still have one left that you're planning to do, I would strongly ask you to consider closing out the year perhaps with one additional, and that being an opportunity to address the budget. And that gives some opportunity to have some community input because we're limited here. And that also takes some pressure off of staff as well. So just something to consider. We'll talk more about that. But I would like to try to perhaps use that as an opportunity to kind of begin to shut down our BAC meetings and use that as a way to do that. So something to consider. Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey, for that question. Any other? Mr. Hagen.
Thank you. And Mr. Nieder, this is just in response to some questions that I've gotten. I know that in the public at large is a little bit of misunderstanding about everything that goes into our budget request. And so I just want to clarify, this is the budget request that we make to the county for our operating budget, which is different than our building program. and our capital improvement budget. And it's paid for out of bond funds. And if you just have like a brief explanation, can you talk about how our capital, just the difference between the two and how those funds are decided each year?
Sure, and yes, and great question, because it can be it's complex, therefore it can be confusing. Two primary budgets. The operating budget covers the day-to-day operational cost of running the school system, and that's what we've been talking about tonight, this $1.9 billion budget. It pays for our teachers. It pays for all the other instructional support staff in the schools. It pays for the bus drivers. It pays for the central services people, custodians. It keeps the utilities running, those sorts of things. The building program budget, or CIP program, capital improvement program, is a wholly separate budget, and it's currently on a 7-year rolling plan, and we've been provided funding by the county in the range of $300 to $350 million a year to be able to invest in building new schools, renovating existing schools, going through major life cycle repairs, whether it's entire roofs, entire HVAC systems within a school, tracks, et cetera. This $1.9 billion operating budget is funded, that we're talking about tonight, is funded by three primary sources: federal sources, state sources, and local sources. There's actually a breakdown in the budget book. Local sources are in the 30% range. Federal, while normally they're in the 8% range, they're about 13%, and the state making up the majority of the funding of that $1.9 billion. The funding for the CIP program, however, is all local funding, and most of that funding is debt-based, whereas the funding for the local funding for the operating budget through the county appropriation is funding through their operating budget, which are their annual revenues, primarily being property taxes and sales tax revenues. And again, so what I've gone through tonight has not at all touched upon that building program.
Thank you. So anyone with questions about what's in our building budget, we should be referred to the CIP, and there they can look and they see what the 7-year plan is based on the bond funding that's been achieved or planned over the next few years.
Yes, and if you go to our website, under the About section, there's a drop down for facilities. There's a wealth of information there on the CIP program.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Any other questions, comments from board members? All right.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Nieder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore, as well. And we look forward to working over the next month to approve a budget and getting this to our county commissioners. That will take some work, but we are ready and look forward and excited as we move forward. All right, the other information item we have is a update regarding second semester, a few updates from second semester. So Superintendent Moore, turn it back over to you.
Good afternoon, good evening again now. As has been our practice recently, I try to provide a quick update during the board meeting of the major items that are covered during the work session, just to provide for those who may not have been here for the work session. There were a couple of major items during the work session today, really just one item that covered a couple of topics related to the planning for the next school year, the 21-22 school year. We gave the board an update on some of our work in human resources around teacher recruitment, virtual job fairs, substitutes, our student teacher program, our future teachers program, just the work that is underway right now in planning for next year as we are heading into a hiring season. There are a couple of follow-ups that we will do based on questions from today, but that was one portion of the presentation. The majority of the time was spent providing in the presentation an update on the discussions and the planning that is underway right now regarding a virtual option for families for the 21-22 school year. While we remain hopeful and expectant that the vast majority of our families will return to in-person instruction for the 2021-2022 school year, we recognize that we are not completely through the pandemic and may need to provide a virtual option for our families who choose to do so. And we outlined for the board this evening some of the operational constructs and conversations that are happening, as well as some of the goals of that program. We got feedback from all of you with some questions and concerns and other things that you'd like to see. And we will come back on April 20th to the board with additional information. And if there are decision points that need to be made, we'll try to make them at that time or give you the timeline around those decision points then. And then finally, you just heard the proposed budget for this evening. That was not part of the work session, but obviously we want to make sure, and I'd like to invite all members of our community at this time, as well as the board members who I know will read the budget book, because you always do, and you have great questions that staff will answer, but our community as well, to provide feedback as we move forward with the superintendent's proposed budget, and then the board reviews and adopts their own budget. That concludes my updates.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Moore, for those updates. And again, we encourage both board and community to take a look at the budget. It is an expansive document, to say the least, but a lot of good information, and one that I know board members will take into account and take very seriously as we move through that process. I did mention earlier, you heard from Mr. Nieder, how we will move through with a couple of meetings, work sessions, sending any questions to, again, Terry Kimsey, Senior Budget Director, for any information analysis that you may need as we go through and look at moving towards, again, making that the board's budget. But again, thank you for that update, Superintendent Moore, and we'll govern ourselves accordingly. At this time, I want to move to our consent agenda.
Chair Sutton, I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent items as listed.
Second?
Got a motion from Mrs. Kushner, second from Ms. Mahaffey to approve the tonight's consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by sign of aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, consent agenda is approved. We have a couple of action items. The first one is from Finance, approving the bell schedules for the 2021-2022 school year in accordance with Board Policy 3300. Mr. Nieder.
Thank you. Good evening again. Tonight we bring you recommended bell schedules for the 2021-22 school year. These were originally presented to the board at their March 16th work session, and no changes to those recommendations presented on the 16th have been made since. There were only two changes to the recommended bell schedules for 2021-22 compared to the current year. The first, we have a new high school opening, Willow Springs High, and the recommendation is to have that school operate under our current standard Tier 1 schedule with a 7:25 a.m. to 2:18 p.m. bell. And the second change involves Fuquay Varina High. During the current year, they are operating out of a swing space, and we had moved their bells to begin 15 minutes earlier as they operated out of that swing space to allow for additional transport time. For 2021-22, they'll be back in their base facility, and we are recommending that they return to the current standard Tier 1 schedule, again with a 7:25 a.m. to 2:18 p.m. bell. I do want to point out that we also presented to the board at the March 16th work session a number of options to have high schools across the district have a later start time. We shared initial options, including shifting all tiers to later start times under the current structure, changing the level of school assigned to each of the three tiers, and also combinations of those two. That work will be ongoing. That work, when I say that, to review alternatives to get the high schools and potentially even middle schools to later start times. And it's not reflected in what we're recommending for this coming year. We plan to bring this larger scale project back to the board in May at one of your work sessions, as we previously had set that expectation. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions and request the board's consideration of approval of the two recommended changes for 2021-22 and effectively the entire schedule.
All right, and I do want to note for those that are sticklers of policy, our board policy 3300 requires us to adopt the bell schedule prior to April 1st because of several items on our agenda in the past. We were not able to make that deadline. So back on March 16th, we waived board policy to allow us to bring staff to bring a final recommendation to this meeting and make a vote on the bell change schedule for this meeting today. So just wanted to make a note of that for, again, those who are sticklers of policy. Can I entertain a motion at this time to accept staff's recommendation for bell schedule changes for the 21-2022 school year?
Chair Sutton, I'd like to make a motion to accept these bell schedules as presented to us.
Got a motion from Mrs. Cash and a second from Mrs. Johnson-Hostler to accept staff's recommendation for the bell schedule for 2021-2022 school year. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Mahaffey.
Thank you. Mr. Nieder and Superintendent Moore, one of the things that we did as a board was extend the year-round bell schedule for an additional 15 minutes. Just to clarify, this puts our year-round schools back at their regular time. So if you have a 9:15 start, you're done at 3:45, as was in previous years, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Mahaffey. Any other comments or further discussion? Seeing or hearing none, all those in favor of the motion show by the sign of aye. Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Bell schedule recommendations have been approved for the 2021-2022 school year.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Before Mr. Nieder leaves, I did have a question, not about the specific bell schedule, but about the ongoing work. You know, the process that we use for providing questions to staff ahead of time about the budget, could we use a similar process maybe to get you some questions in advance about, you know, some of the options or questions we might have as you put together a presentation about bell schedules in the future, just so you maybe collect all of those in advance and aren't taking questions out of the blue at the meeting?
Mr. Hagen, I think that's an excellent suggestion.
All right, so we'll forward those to you or Mr. Schneidmiller, or?
Let us put a structure to it, and then we will let you know. But I think that's a very good suggestion.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Mr. Nieder, I think you're hanging around for this next item as well?
Actually,
Mr. Winters, okay. Next item is recommendation of external audit contract.
All right, thank you, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members. Tonight, we're bringing the recommendation of the external audit contract firm. Board policy requires an annual independent audit of the school system. The audit contract is bid every 3 years to maintain competition. The June 30, 2020 audit was the final year of our previous contract. Staff reviewed the proposals with the board's audit committee on March 9th, and the audit committee recommends the selection of Dixon Hughes Goodman to conduct the annual financial audit for 2021. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Chair Sutton, I make a motion that we accept this recommendation.
Second.
Got a motion from Mrs. Cash and a second from Mrs. Johnson-Hostler to accept the recommendation of the external audit contract. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and thank you, Mr. Winters, for bringing this to us. And I think the last audit was very good work by this firm. But is this their third year that they have been our chief auditor?
So they just completed their third-year contract. So we put out the bid,
Right.
And we are entering into a new round with this group. Our standard practice is that we will change auditors every 6 years. We're not limited to that. We can change at any time. So we put out the bid, and they were the best bid available.
And I think their work's been good, and I just want to restate the practice of changing every 6 years, just so we don't get into too much of a pattern with the same auditor. So thank you
ma'am.
for raising that tonight. That was my main question. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Just one additional question, just so that folks know for the purpose of transparency. Can you tell us who makes up the audit committee?
Ms. Cash is on the audit committee. David Nieder sits on the audit committee. And then we have, I believe it's now 5 members from the public, either CPAs, financial advisors. Do you want the names of those individuals?
I mean, if you don't have them, that's fine. I know that Mrs. Cash, as finance chair, serves as chair of that. So just wanted to, for those that may not know, just who the audit committee or how it's comprised, if you don't have
I will
names.
say Sarah Martin, who is a non-practicing CPA, is the chair of the committee. Laird Hepburn is a financial advisor. William Mondon's a financial advisor. David, help me out. Yeah. We have an attorney.
Rather than maybe get into specifically who, I can share with you what the policy states as far as the structure. There are 6 voting members from the community that are not employed by the school district or having any direct or indirect business dealings with the school district, for the independents, obviously. The Board of Education members will nominate these 6 individuals, and the board as a whole will vote to select the committee. Board members are encouraged to select professionals with a background in accounting, finance, business management, consulting, or law. There is 1 voting member from the community to be appointed by the superintendent. The finance chair or designated board representative who shall serve as a non-voting member. 1 non-voting member from the school system to be appointed by the superintendent. And that's the makeup of the committee, if you will.
No, that's helpful. That's the point I want to make, that this is primarily an external committee of the board with only 1 member from the board, and that being the finance chair. And I misspoke. That's not the chair of the committee, but serves as a representative of the board. But it is primarily made up of external community members who are accountants and experienced in finances that make up that audit committee. So.
Yeah, to give everybody else their due, when I stepped away, I could think of them. Charles Coble is the attorney, and Faith Bynum is the CPA. They're the other 2 members. Sorry.
That was the only one you didn't, yeah.
Yeah, so, sorry.
You did good.
So, thank you for that. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, show by the sign of aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. The recommendation for the external audit contract is accepted, and we'll go to Dixon, Hughes, and Goodman.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Chair Sutton, I make a motion that we go into closed session to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-318.
Wait a minute. I
Oh.
think I've got one more
something?
item.
Did we miss something?
Yeah. Got one item.
Oh,
left.
this is an important item. I rescind the start of my motion. My apologies.
Sorry about that. Extension of the emergency sick leave provision of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Dr. Matillo.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'm
Sorry
happy
about
for
that.
rescinding your motion. Good evening, all. I'm here to present a recommendation regarding the leave provisions of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or FFCRA for short. The original leave provided 2 types of leave: emergency sick leave and emergency FMLA. The requirement that employers offer FFCRA leave to employees initially expired on December 31st, 2020. For any unused FFCRA leave, employers had the option to extend none, some, or all of the provisions of FFCRA through March 31st, 2021. Wake County elected to extend both types of FFCRA leaves through March 31st, 2021 with board approval. The American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, again provides employers with the option of extending FFCRA leave through September 30th, 2021. But the ARPA changes the reasons for which emergency sick leave and emergency FMLA may be taken. The ARPA also extends employer tax credits that are available within these types of leaves and makes those credits available to government employers, including school districts. The emergency sick leave portion of FFCRA provides up to 80 hours of paid sick leave for an employee who has to miss work for COVID-related reasons, which includes caring for a family member who is subject to a quarantine or isolation order, or who has been advised by a health care provider to self-quarantine related to COVID-19. In general, when the leave is related to the employee, the leave is at the employee's regular rate of pay. When the need for leave is related to an employee's family member, it is at the employee's 2/3 rate of their pay. The district has elected, again optionally, to allow employees to request to apply their own accrued leave to the 2/3 leave, whether it's eligible. Unlike the extension through December, employees who utilize the previous 80 hours of FFCRA leave would be granted the additional 80 hours of leave. Additionally, the reasons for which employees are eligible for emergency sick leave has expanded to include when an employee has been exposed to COVID-19 and is awaiting a diagnostic test or is awaiting a medical diagnosis. Additionally, employees are also now eligible for the emergency sick leave if they are obtaining an immunization related to COVID-19 or are experiencing illness side effects from that immunization. It is my recommendation tonight to extend emergency sick leave through June 30th, 2021, retroactive to April 1st. We will continue to monitor health conditions, school plans, and may return with a recommendation to extend through September 30th if we determine it's appropriate. At this time, we are not prepared to bring forth a recommendation to extend the emergency FMLA portion of FFCRA. The original only allowed employees to request FMLA for up to 12 weeks if their child's school or daycare was closed or the provider was unavailable because of COVID reasons. The ARPA requires that if an employer voluntarily extends the FMLA, that it also applies to all of the sick leave reasons and the expanded emergency sick leave reasons. So because extending the emergency FLA provision would potentially provide employees an additional 12 weeks of paid leave for a broad range of reasons, it's our concern that extending this leave at this time may create a scenario of increased numbers of employees on long-term leaves that could impact our ability to staff and operate schools. It's important to note that while we're not recommending the extension of the emergency FMLA provision of FFCRA, lots of acronyms there, sorry, employees still have a variety of leave options available to them, including the 2 weeks that we're recommending of the emergency sick leave tonight. They also have fully paid contagious disease leave as well as regular FML leave that was available to them prior to the pandemic. So in closing, at this time, we are requesting the board to approve an extension of emergency sick leave retroactive to April 1st through June 30th, 2021, which would provide employees up to 2 weeks of paid sick leave for the reasons provided in FFCRA under the new ARPA Act. Happy to take questions at this time.
So at this time, if I could entertain a motion to approve the emergency sick leave provision of FFCRA through June 30th, 2021.
Thanks for repeating it, Chair Sutton. I move that we approve the said long title that Dr. Matillo just introduced to extend the emergency leave.
Second.
I have a motion from Ms. Johnson-Hostler, a second from Mr. Hagerty to approve the emergency sick leave provision of FFCRA through June 30th of this year. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor, show by sign of aye. Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. That provision of FFCRA is approved through June 30th.
Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Now, Ms. Mohammed, if I can entertain that motion to move into closed session.
Now it's time. Okay. Chair Sutton, I make a motion that we go into closed session to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-318.11 A1, A3, and A6, to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privileges provided in GS 143-318.11A3 due to current litigation, Ricketts v. Wake County Public School System et al., case number 5:21-CV-49-FL. To consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318.11A3, and to consider confidential student information protected under GS 115C-402 in the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, 20 U.S.C. 1232G.
Second.
Got a motion from Ms. Mahaffey, second from Ms. Johnson-Hostler to go into closed session for the items just stated and as listed on our agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by the sign of aye. Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion is approved. We are now in closed session. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and good night.